Hello, welcome to another IELTS essay writing video. Today we're going to write a Task 2 response, and we'll go through the essay process from start to finish. If you find this video helpful, I encourage you to visit my website at www.englishryan.com and my blog at www.ielts.com. Recently, a student sent me this question, and they were asking how to respond to the question correctly. So if we look at it from the beginning, it says, you should spend no more than 40 minutes on this task. Cuisine can often be a culturally sensitive topic. So now before we get to the task itself, let's just go over the meaning of this phrase. So cuisine, which is sort of food, and typically cuisine is a word that connects food to perhaps the region it comes from. So there's things like Chinese cuisine or English cuisine or Canadian cuisine. Now something that's culturally sensitive would be something that is perhaps different based on the culture that it comes from. So this line, cuisine can often be a culturally sensitive topic, is just saying that what one place in the world considers food, another place in the world may not consider food. I'll forewarn you, today's topic is a little bit bizarre. I'm not quite sure where the student found this question, but we'll give it a try anyways. Now the task, write an essay for an educated reader on the following topic, stating to what extent you agree or disagree only after analyzing both sides of the argument thoroughly. So now here are the instruction words, which if you've watched my video on interpreting Task 2 question, you know that this is the portion of the question that is telling you to do something. So it is a very, very important part. So here the question is asking us whether we agree or disagree. So of course many students right away would say, okay, we're going to be writing an argument essay. But if we read the rest of the statement, it says only after analyzing both sides of the argument thoroughly. So what they're saying is that they're going to present an argument to us. We have to look at the two sides of this argument. We have to sort of defend both sides, and then we have to present our opinion, whether we agree or disagree. So this is not in an argument style of essay, this will be in a discussion style of essay. Okay, so now here is the argument. In select parts of the world, dog meat is a traditional food dating back thousands of years. However, the consumption of dog meat today should be considered barbaric and banned globally. So, let's see. So now the first sentence, so in some parts of the world, dog meat is a food, and they give us a little bit of historical background because this is perhaps a topic that a student maybe doesn't know all that much about. So they tell us that that this is a practice in some parts of the world that has been historically employed for thousands of years. And the second part, however, the consumption of dog meat today should be considered barbaric and banned globally. Now, if barbaric is a new word, barbaric is a word that refers to something that is kind of primitive, or if you know the word barbarian, which refers to a person that is perhaps a little bit uncultured and maybe doesn't act with complete courtesy all the time. This would be a barbaric person. So the argument here is saying that dog meat should not be considered a food, and people who eat dog meat are perhaps a little bit maybe behind the times. That's what the argument is saying here, and it's saying that dog meat should be banned. Eating dog meat should be banned as a practice all over the world, globally. So we have to come up with a discussion essay for this, and basically we're going to be looking at the two sides. So one side, which is saying that dog meat should be considered a food, and the other side that is saying that dog meat should be banned. Now, if we just do a little brainstorm together to think of maybe a point or two that supports each side. So thinking about dog meat as something that should be allowed to be consumed, I would think that probably the strongest argument in favor of that is that this is a practice that has gone on for thousands of years. So this is something that people have been doing for a very long period of time. It's not a new thing, and maybe a lot of people that would consume dog meat would consider a dog perhaps an animal just like any other animal. So why should we differentiate them between other animals that human beings consume? So I think that on that side, probably the strongest argument would be just the length of time that people have been practicing this. Now, on the other side, the consumption of dog meat, I think that a lot of people would argue that dogs have acted in partnership with human beings for thousands of years. So in many ways, dogs have always been a part of human society, in not so much a predator-prey sort of relationship. What I'm saying is that human beings historically did not act as the predator of dogs, and dogs acting as the prey, but it's been more of a friendship almost, that in most cultures, I don't think there is a culture in the world that has not grown with domestic dogs. So this is not really the same as other kinds of animals that perhaps are indifferent to the company of human beings. So dogs have sort of acted as a friend or a partner to human beings over thousands of years, and perhaps for that reason, dog meat should not be considered a food, or dogs themselves should be saved from the label of being a viable source of nutrition. Okay, so let's go with those two arguments. Now, I'm not going to go over the structure of an essay, so if you're not familiar with the structure of an essay, please watch my other videos regarding that before we get started. And just to remind you that this is a discussion essay, so if you have to go and watch that video now, go and watch the discussion essay outline. So basically, as you know, what we need is a broad sentence to start our essay with. And today we're talking about culture, and we're talking about food, and we're talking about perhaps cultural differences when it comes to cuisine and what people consider as cuisine. So let's first tie those ideas together. Perhaps something like culture and cuisine have gone hand in hand. Might be a little bit dramatic here and say since the beginning of time. And I'm also going to tie in the idea that maybe certain cultures feel one thing is an acceptable practice or an acceptable food source, and another culture would find that perhaps a little bit, perhaps that food source quite sensitive. So let's see. And what is considered an acceptable practice by one group may be considered completely offensive by another. Culture and cuisine have gone hand in hand since the beginning of time, and what is considered an acceptable practice by one group may be considered completely offensive by another. So by offensive, we mean that people would perhaps even get a little bit angry over this, over perhaps seeing another group consume a certain food like dog, which I think is probably one of the main examples of that. So as you know, then the next sentence we have to make this a little bit more narrow. We want to focus in on dog as being kind of central to the essay's topic, and the second sentence is where we do that. So now today we're talking about a discussion, so we're going to call this the debate, which when we say the debate, you know, this kind of distances ourselves from this discussion in a way, because you know, as you know, we don't want to say our opinion at the beginning of this essay. That's not what you do in a discussion essay. You look at the opinions of others, and then you come to your own reasoned conclusion. So we're going to call it the debate. So the debate over whether dog meat should or should not be thought of as an appropriate, let's call this a dietary supplement. Now, maybe we want to say that this is sort of not a new argument between peoples, or not a new discussion between people, but perhaps something that's been going on for a while. So maybe illustrates the ongoing nature of this I guess we'll call it an exchange. Sometimes the word exchange can mean, you know, to exchange ideas, I guess, in a short way, and it doesn't really mention the nature of the exchange. You can have a fiery exchange, which would be a very maybe heated or emotional sort of fight between peoples, or you can have you know, something that's maybe a bit tamer in nature, which is just an exchange of ideas. So we don't mention the nature of it. We just say it's an exchange. Now I'm going to put this onto a single page so we can see it more clearly. Okay, so culture and cuisine have gone hand in hand since the beginning of time, and what is considered an acceptable practice by one group may be considered completely offensive by another. This will help. Oh, there we go. The debate over whether dog meat should or should not be thought of as an appropriate dietary supplement illustrates the ongoing nature of this exchange. So what kind of exchange is this? Well, the nature of this exchange is ongoing, so this is not a new debate. This is something that's a little bit older. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to present both sides of the argument. So, on the one hand, many argue dog meat plays worthy sustenance, we'll say, worthy sustenance to humans, and whoops, should be no, maybe should not be thought of any differently than the meat of another animal. On the one hand, many argue dog meat plays worthy sustenance to humans and should not be thought of any differently than the meat of another animal. If the word sustenance is a new word for you, it would just be kind of like nourishment or a food that sustains a person. Okay, now why is this red? Oh. Now, so we want to present the other side of the argument. So we started this little part with on the one hand. So let's continue with on the other. Many consider dogs to be creatures of understanding, we'll say, that have grown together with humans throughout humanity's history, and thus more maybe we can say that that dogs and people have grown together, and this has kind of, like we were saying before, created more of a friendship relationship between them rather than a predator-prey relationship. So so we'll say that they are more friend than, I don't want to say more than food, maybe we'll say more than entree. And I hope this, oh yes, it gives me the little, it's a word of French origin, entree, which is sort of like main course. It's kind of comical, actually. On the one hand, many consider dogs to be creatures of understanding that have grown together with humans throughout humanity's history, and thus more friend than entree. Okay, so the two sides of the argument have been presented. Now we want to just say very briefly that we're going to look at both sides in detail, and then we're going to come to our own conclusion. So both sides of this argument will be critiqued before a well-reasoned conclusion is found. Both sides of the argument are going to be looked at in detail before we come to our own conclusion. Okay, so now let's go on to our first supporting paragraph. Now, in this paragraph, as you know, the first argument that we mentioned in our introduction paragraph was in support of eating dog meat, and like we talked about when we first looked at this question, we're going to use the idea of a historical practice, a very, very long historical practice, as the evidence that we give in support of this practice, in support of eating dog meat. So let's maybe we can start with connecting this long history with the present by saying something like, even in 2011, there are many parts of the world that still engage in the practice of consuming dog meat. And I'll even stick in here as a source of nourishment. Okay, now let's give the example that was in our essay question of how dog meat has been consumed for a very long period of time. Now we need to connect that to real life, and I think it's quite widely known I live in China, so I know this for a fact, but I think that perhaps if you're writing the examination, and so if you got a question like this, you'd probably also know that these sorts of cuisine choices are, I don't want to say prevalent, but they're not uncommon in Asia. So I think, I mean, just off the top of my head, I know Korean people consume dog meat, and I know also in China people consume dog meat. I don't think in Japan, but I'm not very sure. But I do definitely know Korea and China. So I'm going to use Asia for my example, and maybe if you were writing this essay and you're from another part of the world where dog meat is consumed, you could use that as your example if it's also perhaps a practice that has gone on for a very long period of time. So, for example, many Asian countries. Do I have too many spaces in here? Many Asian countries. I'm going to say including China and Korea. Consider dog meat to be an acceptable, let's see here, form of food, and have thought so for thousands of years. Okay. Now, a little trick that I want to illustrate to you is the way that I have let this example unfold. So basically, I have made it clear this is going to be an example. Oh, for examples, what's going on here? For example, many Asian countries, including China and Korea. Consider, now before we get down to the bottom part here, so you can see a couple of commas in here, 3 commas right at the beginning of the sentence. And this is kind of a stylistic trick that you can use on your examination. So basically what I've done is I've said, for example, many Asian countries, and then I paused myself for a second with a comma, and then I mentioned 2 Asian countries, and then I put another comma in, and then I continue with my point. So this is, I think it's kind of an attractive writing tool. It makes you sound very academic in many ways, and kind of more fluent than if you were to just have, for example, comma, and then blah, blah, blah. But you kind of break down the example into different layers. So firstly, we're talking about Asian countries, then we're getting even more specific, So perhaps if we were talking about another topic, like maybe foods from a city in Australia, so we might say, for example, in Australia, comma, especially Sydney, comma, people eat blah 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 blah. So this, we're kind of taking it down into layers. So we're saying, for example, and then we have the layer of Australia, and then we have the layer of Sydney. So anyways, back to our example here, we have the layer of Asian countries, and then we have the layer of China and Korea. And it's kind of just a nice stylistic thing you can use. So, okay, consider dog meat to be an acceptable form of food, and have thought so for thousands of years. Now, in this next sentence, we have to kind of connect this sentence to the topic sentence and show sort of how it makes the argument of eating dog meat plausible. So, let's say here, thus, the practice of eating dog meat is not simply a trend. This is not something kind of, kind of passé, or something that has just started 5 years ago. No, this is not just a trend. This is something that's gone on for a very long period of time. So not simply a trend, but a well-established historical tradition, and is for this reason difficult to debunk. Debunk, it sort of just means to, if an idea does not have worthy support, then it is easy to debunk, which means it's easy to prove otherwise. Debunk sort of means to overthrow or prove otherwise. So what we're saying here is that because this is such a long tradition, and people have been eating dog for thousands of years, and it's quite established. This is something that's kind of difficult to simply say, oh, okay, this is something that shouldn't be done anymore. So thus the practice of eating dog meat is not simply a trend, but a well-established historical tradition, and is for this reason difficult to debunk. Okay, so now the last sentence, we want to show how we can understand, from the argument that we've presented here, how we can understand that people do consume dog meat and are in support of consuming dog meat and would not support a global ban. If you remember from our essay question, the point was that the argument was that there should be a global ban on the consumption of dog meat. So we want to say here that these points, they prove otherwise. So because of this, it is easy to see, I'll say easy to understand, why many people would not support a global ban on the have we used consumption too many times? On the consumption of dog meat. Okay, so now this paragraph has kind of created a unit that supports the consumption of dog meat, and shows how we can understand people would support that position, because it is such a historically established practice. Okay, on to the other point of view. Now it's nice to kind of use a transition word here to show that we're going to talk about the other side of the coin. So so we could say on the other side of the coin, which is a pretty well established idiom, or I mean, we can just use however. So however, there is another pool of thought that argues dogs have proven themselves to be deserving of, we'll say, humanity's compassion. Sorry, I know that's hard to read, so let me put this all on the same page. Okay, indent. However, there's another pool of thought that argues dogs have proven themselves to be deserving of humanity's compassion, and therefore should not be thought of as food. Okay. So in the sentence, we're just stating the other point of view that people believe. We've said here another pool of thought. This is not our point of view, but this is somebody's point of view, that dogs deserve humanity's respect. They deserve humanity's compassion. So they deserve to have human beings take care of them, and therefore should not be thought of as a food. Now we haven't said why exactly, but we've just stated that this is the point of view. Now here we're going to give an example. So, as we've said in our opening when we were discussing the question, dogs pretty much in every culture around the world have become domestic and have grown as friends, really. I mean, the relationship is kind of difficult to label otherwise, and for that reason, it's easy to argue that dogs should not be considered the same as perhaps other animals that people consume. So let's try something like indeed. It is very difficult. I'm trying to say here that it's hard to find a country where dogs have not been considered, a friend of some kind. So it's very difficult. Maybe I'm going to say, if not impossible. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to find a country in the world that does not boast an extremely long history of partnership with canines. Canines, of course, being dogs. So it is indeed, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to find a country in the world that does not boast an extremely long history of partnership with canines. Okay, now we want to connect this idea to the fact that many people feel dogs are friends and that you don't eat your friend. So this friendship, we'll say, this friendship makes it clear, we'll say makes it hard to support the idea that dog meat should be permitted food. Okay, let me just check this paragraph from the beginning. However, there is another pool of thought that argues dogs have proven themselves to be deserving of humanity's compassion and therefore should not be thought of as a food. Indeed, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to find a country in the world that does not boast an extremely long history of partnership with canines. This friendship makes it hard to support the idea that dog meat should be a permitted food. Okay, good. So the sentences are working together. We've presented the idea. We've given an example. Now, this example is a little bit loose. We don't really mention a specific country. It would probably be better if we did, but we'll leave it the way it is for now. And then we mentioned how the friendship that many people feel towards dogs, and that this is sort of universal around the world, makes it hard for us to believe in the idea that dogs should be a consumable product. Okay, thus it is clear why many people believe the consumption of dogs is a practice that should be curbed. Thus, it is clear why many people believe the consumption of dogs is a practice that should be curbed. Now, curbed means lessened, but our essay question told us the idea was that it is banned, not just lessened. So I'm going to change curbed, we'll say eliminated. Eliminated, which means totally removed from practice. Okay, so we've presented both sides of the argument. We've given supporting evidence. We have not given our own opinion. Now it's time to summarize what we've talked about And as the essay question points out, at this point we want to come to our own reasoned conclusion. So the first sentence we want is something that sort of summarizes the points that we've talked about and comes to present what it is that we believe.